Money FM 89.3. Best of breakfast. Morning Shot.
Welcome to Morning Shot. I'm Audrey Siek. Chinese President Xi Jinping has wrapped his high-stakes tour of Southeast Asia. From Vietnam to Malaysia and Cambodia, President Xi urged regional economies to stand together and positioned China as a more stable, dependable partner. This comes after U.S. President Donald Trump ramped up its tariffs against most countries, with its biggest targets on China, who has since hit back with tit-for-tat tariffs. But here's the question. As China looks to diversify its trade ties, could Southeast Asia be turning into an economic buffer zone of sorts, helping China hedge against the pressures of a U.S.-dominated global trade environment? To unpack what's happening behind the scenes and what this all means for the Southeast Asian region, we're joined by Professor Lawrence Loh, Director of the Center for Governance and Sustainability at the NUS Business School. Good morning, Professor Loh. Happy to have you join us this morning.
Yes, good morning, Audrey. Happy to be here.
It's so great to chat with you as always. It's been described as a charm offensive, right? President Xi's visit to Southeast Asia comes at a crucial time with everything going on. So what's really driving this diplomatic push? Why is the region so important to China right now?
Yes, if you look at the bigger picture, is tariff. In fact, we are in a terrifying time.
Yes.
I think Xi's visit couldn't be at a better time. In fact, what happened in the last few weeks is definitely a wake-up call to the world, including Southeast Asia. So I think President Xi's visit to Southeast Asia is definitely more than a charm offensive. And in fact, it is actually geopolitically, it is to reinforce the global leadership of China, perhaps to even fill the gap. But what is more important beyond the geopolitics is now another thing coming in is called geoeconomics. In other words, coming to Southeast Asia, of course, this region here is the trade route. There's a market both for the consumer, the market also for the production. So I think we are seeing a combination, a synthesis of geopolitics and geoeconomics operating here when President Xi comes.
Yeah. So speaking of geoeconomics, are we seeing Southeast Asia being kind of drawn deeper into China's economic orbit because of this trade war?
Yes, definitely. I think if you look at ASEAN, of course, the U.S. and ASEAN, of course, has already a good relationship in the past. The U.S. has always been the largest investor, but nevertheless, U.S. is actually the second largest trading partner, and China is, of course, first. So I think going forward, the fact that the U.S. seems to be moving backward, I think economically, ASEAN as a bloc will have to now make good ties, be a good partner to the Chinese, government, and of course all the businesses that comes from China.
Yeah. So let's zoom out here for a moment, Professor, because ASEAN as a bloc has already overtaken the U.S. and the EU as China's largest export market since last year. So realistically, is there any real substantial additional room for growth? How much more can we buy?
I think, of course, if you look at China, they're quite flexible and elastic. Say from the investment side, there's always the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, that goes on. So I think that the fact that President Xi has come is not only just to cater to the trade, but in fact is actually to put in certain commitment for long-term investment, particularly in the infrastructure. And I think even for trade, I think more countries are finding it less tenable to, say, export to the U.S., including China. So I think the ASEAN consumer, the market here might be something that will be quite attractive. Chinese, you can see already even like simple commodities like durians. It is actually going to the Chinese market in quite big volumes, even in recent times.
Yeah, so they actually really love durian over there. I was quite surprised to see that. But let's talk about the risks here. This balancing act must be tricky for some Southeast Asian governments. How do you see them navigating between kind of embracing new opportunities with China, but while also managing the risk of being caught in the crossfire of U.S.-China tensions?
Yes. I think the risk is always there. To put things in perspective, the U.S. does not really have a good track record historically in the involvement in the Asia region, including Southeast Asia. I think probably some of the leaders might recall some time back the U.S. withdrew from Vietnam, Saigon, then known as, but now it's Ho Chi Minh City, and recently Kabul in Afghanistan. So I think that fair weather friend concept has always steeped very deeply in Asia, particularly even Southeast Asia. So I think the risk factor is definitely there. I think we probably actually need a counterweight. I think that the region has been too steep in relationship with the U.S., and I think China provides that alternative. So I think in terms of the risk, you need certain security. I think the ultimate security is actually economic security.
Let's also look at our ties with China. Many Southeast Asian countries, including Vietnam and Malaysia, have pretty complex ties with Beijing, especially when it comes to stuff like territorial disputes in the South China Sea and other political issues. How do you think these geopolitical tensions affect trade cooperation?
I think if you look at ASEAN, even if there's one ASEAN, there's no one ASEAN view. And I think very rightly so. The different ASEAN countries have their own calculation in terms of weighing the relationship with the U.S. and China. And of course, even right now, certain ASEAN countries is actually loggerheads with China and very close to the U.S. But I think going forward, I think each country will have to go back to the drawing board again and do the recalibration. And I think that this is something that might shift certain countries back to the neighborhood. And I think, there's a saying, a close neighbor is better than a distant relative. So I think everybody will appreciate the close neighborhood that is going to get into a more dynamic mode in the near future.
Yeah. So I want to also have your take on Singapore's relationship with China. Of course, President Xi did not visit Singapore this time, but how would you assess our relationship with Beijing?
Oh, definitely. I think that's something quite critical in the overall scheme of our international interaction. And of course, China is the largest trading partner of Singapore itself. And U.S. actually is the largest investor in Singapore. So I think Singapore will have to do this delicate balance. If you want growth, if you want jobs, you go for investment. If you want currency, you want livelihoods, you want commodities, you want materials, you go to China. So I think that inevitable balancing is quite important, particularly Singapore is a small country. And I think we probably have to stand by what we, in Singapore has always said, we don't take sides, but we take a stand,
Yeah. So looking ahead, Professor, if this U.S.-China trade war drags on or escalates even further, do you think Southeast Asia will ultimately possibly benefit from this, or could it find itself squeezed between two economic giants with limited room to maneuver?
I think as long as Southeast Asia stay united and not to be used as bargaining chip, as a bloc, as individual country, because even if there's a risk, in every risk there's an opportunity. In every tension there's a cohesion. In every diversity there's solidarity. So I think that the tension going forward, I think that's facing us right now. They all start with T: technology, trade, tariff, and the most important T, Trump.
You're right. Yes. Lots of moving parts in these uncertain times. And we'll definitely be keeping a close eye on all of the T's and how Southeast Asia continues to navigate this complex economic and geopolitical landscape. That was Professor Lawrence Loh of NUS Business School. Thanks as always, Professor, for your time and insights. Always great chatting with you.
Thank you, Audrey.
Thank you. Keep it here on Money FM 89.3.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.